Hello, my name is Angelina. I am a student of English. I want to tell you about my journey, how I practiced to think in English. It was not easy in the beginning, but I did not give up. I kept trying every day. Have you ever wanted to think in English but found yourself stuck translating in your head? I used to do that too. But one day, I found a way to change it, and it made everything easier. Let me share my journey with you. When I first started learning English, I was excited. I had always wanted to speak fluently, to watch movies without subtitles, and to travel without struggling to communicate. I imagined myself talking easily, like native speakers on TV, without stopping to search for words. But in reality, my experience was very different. In the beginning, I thought I was making good progress. I memorized a lot of vocabulary, studied grammar rules, and practiced writing sentences. My textbooks were filled with exercises, and I made long lists of new words with their meanings in my native language. Every day, I would sit down and try to remember as many words as possible. I believed that if I knew enough words, I would be able to speak fluently, but I was wrong. The real problem appeared when I tried to have a conversation. Whenever I wanted to say something in English, my brain would immediately think in my native language first. Then, I would try to translate each word in my head before speaking. This process took too much time. By the time I finished translating my sentence, the conversation had already moved on. I would open my mouth to speak, but then I would hesitate. My classmates would answer quickly while I was still, trying to form my sentence. I felt frustrated. One day in class, my teacher asked me a simple question. "What did you do this morning?" It was such an easy question, and I knew exactly what I wanted to say. But instead of answering right away, I paused. My brain started translating from my native language. I thought, okay, first I need to say, "I woke up." But how do I say that in English? I searched for the words in my memory. Then I ate breakfast. But wait, should I say eat or ate? Oh no, what if I make a mistake? By the time I finally formed my sentence, everyone was looking at me, waiting. I felt embarrassed. My teacher gave me an encouraging smile, but I could feel my classmates growing impatient. When I finally spoke, my words came out slowly. I woke up. Then, I ate breakfast. Even though my answer was correct, I felt like I had failed. I realized that I wasn't really thinking in English. I was still thinking in my native language and translating every word in my head before speaking. That was why I was so slow. That was why I hesitated. This problem wasn't just in the classroom. It happened in real life, too. One evening, I went to a coffee shop, and I wanted to order something in English. I knew exactly what I wanted. A cup of coffee with milk. It was simple. But when I reached the counter and saw the barista waiting for my order, I froze again. In my head, I thought in my native language first. Then I tried to translate. Do I say I want or can I have? Should I say a coffee or some coffee? What if I say it wrong? My heart started beating faster. I didn't want to make a mistake. I didn't want the barista to think I was bad at English, so I panicked. Instead of speaking English, I pointed at the menu and just said, "This one." The barista nodded and gave me my coffee, but I felt terrible. I had missed another chance to practice. Why was it so hard to just say a few simple words? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Why did I struggle so much when others could speak so easily? I realized that my problem wasn't that I didn't know English. I had studied for months. I knew a lot of words, but my brain was not trained to think in English. Instead, it was trained to translate, and that was slowing me down. I thought about my classmates who spoke faster than me. I noticed something. They never paused to translate. They didn't get stuck like I did. It was almost as if they were thinking directly in English. But how? How could I stop translating and start thinking in English? That question stayed in my mind for days. I knew that if I wanted to speak fluently, I had to change the way I learned English. Memorizing words and grammar rules wasn't enough. I had to train my brain to think in English, just like a native speaker. But I had no idea how to do that. One day, I was sitting in my bedroom, looking around. I saw my desk, my chair, my lamp. And suddenly, an idea came to me. What if I tried to see everything in English? Instead of thinking, this is a desk in my native language and then translating it, I would just say it in English directly. This is a desk. It was a simple idea, but it felt like a new way of learning. I decided to try it. I looked around my room and started naming things in English. Bed, window, bookshelf, door. Then I tried to make sentences. My bed is soft. The window is open. The books are on the shelf. At first it felt strange. I had never done this before. My brain wanted to go back to my native language, but I didn't let it. I forced myself to think only in English. Then, I tried the same thing when I walked outside. Instead of saying, that's a tree in my language and translating, I told myself in English, that is a tree. The leaves are green. The sky is blue. I didn't know if this would work, but I promised myself I would keep doing it every day. I had taken my first step toward thinking in English. As I sat in my bedroom, looking around and naming objects in English, I felt something shift inside. Me. For the first time, I wasn't translating. I wasn't struggling to form sentences in my head. I was simply looking at things and thinking about them directly in English. It felt new, almost strange, but also exciting. I had always believed that speaking English was about memorizing words and grammar rules. But in that moment, I realized it was much more than that. It was about training my brain to think in a new way. I wasn't just studying English anymore. I was living in it, even inside my own mind. But I knew that naming objects in my room wasn't enough. I had to take this practice outside into the real world. The next morning, I woke up with a new mindset. Instead of thinking, I need to wake up in my native language and then translating it, I tried saying it directly in English. I am waking up. As I sat up in bed, I told myself in English, my blanket is soft. When I walked to my dresser, I thought, I am opening the drawer. I am picking a blue shirt. I kept doing this as I moved through my morning routine. I am brushing my teeth. The water is cold. I am drinking coffee. At first, it was hard. My brain wanted to go back to my old habit of translating. Sometimes I caught myself thinking in my native language, and I had to stop and restart the sentence in English. But I didn't let that discourage me. I reminded myself, every time I think in English, I am getting better. That afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. But this wasn't just any walk, this was my first English thinking walk. As I stepped outside, I looked around and started naming everything in English. The sun is bright. The road is empty. The leaves are falling from the trees. Kept describing everything I saw. It felt strange at first, but after a few minutes, it started to feel natural. I wasn't translating. I was thinking in English. When I passed by a little bakery, I thought, that smells like fresh bread. When I saw a child playing with a ball, I told myself, the boy is laughing. The ball is red. Then something funny happened. I saw a cat sitting on a fence, and in my mind, I said, the cat looks sleepy. And just as I thought that, the cat yawned. I smiled to myself. It felt like I was really inside the English language, not just studying it. But this practice wasn't just about naming objects, it was also about talking to myself in English. As I kept walking, I decided to go one step further. Instead of just naming things, I started making full thoughts in English. I wonder what I should eat for dinner. Maybe I will cook pasta. Oh, that car is driving too fast. The more I did this, the more natural it became. I realized that I was having conversations with myself in English. It felt like a breakthrough. I started using questions to keep my thoughts going. What time is it? Do I have homework today? What will I do tomorrow? Suddenly, I wasn't just thinking in English. I was living in it. As I reached the park, I saw a bench and decided to sit down. I watched people passing by and described them in my head. That woman is wearing a yellow dress. The man is carrying a backpack. It was like my brain was playing a game. I was training it to stay in English, no matter what. Then something happened that made me laugh. A little boy ran past me holding an ice cream cone. He was smiling, but suddenly, plop! The ice cream fell to the ground. The boy looked at it for a second, then started crying. Without thinking, I told myself in English, "Oh no, he dropped his ice cream." I realized that I had made a mistake. At first, I said drop instead of dropped. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt proud. Why? Because I had corrected myself in English without translating. This was the moment I knew that my practice was working. My brain was starting to catch mistakes on its own. I wasn't thinking in my native language anymore. I was training myself to think like a native English speaker. After that day, I made a new habit. Whenever I was alone, I would talk to myself in English, not out loud, but in my mind. If I was cooking, I would say, "I am cutting the vegetables. The knife is sharp." If I was cleaning my room, I would think, "I need to put my books on the shelf." If I was walking home from school, I would tell myself, "I am crossing the street. The light is red." I even started imagining conversations in English. Before going to a restaurant, I would think, "Okay, how will I order my food?" I will say, "Can I have a cheeseburger, please?" Before going to class, I would practice. If the teacher asked me what I did yesterday, I will say, "Yesterday I went to the mall with my friend." The more I did this, the faster my thinking became. One morning, I gave myself a challenge. Can I spend the whole day thinking only in English? At first, it was difficult. My brain wanted to switch back to my native language. But every time that happened, I stopped myself and restarted in English. By the afternoon, I realized something. Amazing. I was no longer translating at all. The words were just coming to me naturally, as if my brain had finally accepted English as a part of my daily life. For the first time, I felt like an English speaker. I knew this was just the beginning, but I was ready for the next step. I had spent days naming everything around me in English. Now, I needed to practice speaking it out loud. After days of naming everything around me in English, I noticed something exciting. My brain was finally staying in English without me forcing it. I was no longer translating words before thinking. But there was still one problem. I wasn't actually speaking English out loud. I could think in English, I could form sentences in my mind, but when I had to speak to someone, I still hesitated. My words felt slow. My tongue felt stiff. It was like the English sentences in my mind got stuck before leaving my mouth. I needed to take the next step. I needed to talk to myself in English every day, not just in my mind, but out loud. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. I looked at my reflection and took a deep breath. "Hello, my name is Angelina," I said out loud. Hearing my own voice in English felt strange at first. I wasn't used to it. But I smiled and continued. I'm learning English. I want to think and speak in English fluently." I paused and looked at myself in the mirror. Did I sound confident? No. Did I sound fluent? Not yet. But did I sound like someone who was trying? Yes. That was enough to keep going. The next morning, I decided to take my practice to the next level. Instead of just thinking in English, I would speak my thoughts, out loud, even when I was alone. When I woke up, I stretched and said, "Good morning. Today is a new day." As I made my bed, I said, "I need to fix my pillow. My blanket is a little messy." When I went to the kitchen, I spoke out loud. "I am making breakfast. I am pouring some juice." I kept talking, describing everything I did, just like I had done in my mind before. But now I was training my mouth to move in English. At first, I felt a little silly. Talking to myself? Out loud? It felt strange. But I reminded myself, this is how I get better. If I could speak English fluently when I was alone, then speaking to other people would become easier. One evening, I tried something new. Instead of just talking to myself around the house, I stood in front of the mirror again. I looked at myself and said, "Angelina, today we are going to have a conversation." Then I pretended to be two people. I asked myself a question. "What did you do today?" Then I answered in a different voice. "Well, I went to school, I studied English. Then I came home and ate lunch." I switched voices again. "Oh, that sounds like a nice day. What will you do tomorrow?" I answered. "Tomorrow I will go to the library. I need to read a new book." At first I laughed at myself. Was I really having a conversation with my reflection? But then I realized this was actually helping me. I was practicing real conversations in English. I was training my brain to respond in English quickly. And the best part, I was doing it in a comfortable space without any fear of mistakes. After a few days, I decided to take my speaking practice even further. One afternoon, I was alone in my bedroom, and I looked at my laptop. I smiled and said out loud, "Hello, laptop. How are you today?" Of course, my laptop didn't answer, but I continued talking. "You help me with my English. I use you to watch videos and learn new words." Then I picked up my phone and said, "And you? You help me talk to my friends. But sometimes I use you too much. I should take a break from you." It was a fun way to practice speaking. And the best part? Since I was alone, I didn't feel nervous. Talking to objects became a daily habit. If I was washing dishes, I would say, "Hello, plates. Time to get clean." If I was choosing clothes, I would say, "Which shirt should I wear today? Maybe the blue one." If I was cooking, I would say, "This soup smells so good. I hope it tastes good, too." It may have seemed funny, but it helped me get comfortable speaking in English. One day, I gave myself a challenge. Can I talk about my whole day in English, out loud? That night, before bed, I sat on my bed, looked around my room, and started speaking. Today was a great day. I woke up early and made breakfast. Then I went to school. In English class, I learned some new words. My teacher was very kind. After school, I went to the park and saw some children playing. The weather was nice. Then I came home and did my homework. Now I feel tired but happy. I was surprised. I had just spoken for 2 whole minutes in English without stopping. Of course, I made a few mistakes. I hesitated a little, but I kept going. It felt like a huge achievement. I was no longer just thinking in English. I was talking in English every single day. As I kept practicing, something amazing happened. One day, I was at a cafe ordering coffee. Usually, I would feel nervous speaking English to the cashier. But this time, something was different. I walked up to the counter and the words came out naturally. "Hi, can I have a cappuccino, please?" The cashier smiled and said, "Sure. What size?" Without thinking, I responded, "Medium, please." When I sat down with my coffee, I felt proud. I had spoken English without fear, without hesitation, and without translating. I had come so far. From struggling to form English sentences in my mind to thinking in English naturally. From being too shy to speak to talking to myself every day. But I knew there was one more step left in my journey. I had to practice speaking with real people, and so I set a new challenge for myself. Tomorrow, I will have a conversation in English with someone new. The next morning, I woke up feeling nervous but excited. Today was the day. I had promised myself that I would talk to someone in English. No more hiding. No more just thinking or talking to myself. I had to speak with a real person. At school, I saw my classmate, Sophia. She was also learning English, but she was a little more confident than me. She always tried to speak in English, even if she made mistakes. I walked up to her and said, "Hi, Sophia. How are you today?" She smiled and answered, "I am good, Angelina. How about you?" For a second, I wanted to switch back to my first language. It was easier. But I stopped myself. I took a deep breath and said, I am good too. I want to practice my English. Can we talk in English? Sophia nodded. Of course. That is a great idea. We started talking about school, homework, and our favorite books. I made mistakes, but I kept going, and something amazing happened. I understood her English without translating in my head. This made me think. If I could understand spoken English in real conversation, then maybe I could understand English from other sources too, without translating. That day, I made a new goal. I will watch, read, and listen to English without translating it into my language. That evening, I sat down with my laptop. Before, when I watched English videos, I always used subtitles. If I didn't understand a word, I would pause the video, translate it, and then continue watching. But now, I wanted to try something different. I opened a simple English video and turned off the subtitles. The first few minutes were difficult. My brain kept searching for translations. I wanted to stop and check every word. But I told myself, no, just listen. Try to understand the meaning. At first, I only caught a few words. But as I kept watching, I started understanding more. I noticed something interesting. I didn't need to understand every word to understand the story. Even if I missed some words, I could guess the meaning from the speaker's tone, facial expressions, and the words I already knew. By the end of the video, I felt proud. I had watched an entire video in English, without translating. After my success with videos, I decided to try reading in English without translating every word. I picked up a simple English book from my school library. Before, I used to stop at every unknown word and look it up. But now, I made a new rule. If I don't know a word, I will try to understand it from the sentence. I will not stop reading. The first few pages were challenging. I saw words I didn't know. My brain wanted to translate, but I forced myself to keep reading. And then, something amazing happened. Even without understanding every single word, I understood the story. For example, I saw this sentence in the book. The little girl clutched her teddy bear tightly as she walked through the dark hallway. I didn't know the word clutched, but I understood the rest of the sentence. A little girl, a teddy bear, a dark hallway. I guessed that clutched must mean held tightly. And I was right. I realized that I didn't need to stop and translate every word. I could guess words from context. This was a huge step forward. Next, I decided to challenge myself with listening. I found an English podcast for beginners and put on my headphones. At first, it felt like too many words at once. My brain wanted to pause, translate, and replay, but I told myself, just keep listening. Focus on the meaning, not the words. At first, I only caught a few phrases. Today, we will talk about, let's begin. That's a great question. But as I kept listening, my ears adjusted. I started recognizing more words. I started following the conversation. And by the end of the episode, I realized I understood the general idea. I wasn't focusing on every word. I was focusing on the meaning. And that's when I knew I was truly thinking in English. One day, something incredible happened. I was sitting in a cafe drinking coffee. I overheard two people speaking in English at the next table. Before, if I heard English, my brain would start translating word by word. But this time, something was different. I understood them immediately, without translating. They were talking about their weekend plans. They mentioned going to the movies and trying a new restaurant. And I understood everything, like it was my first language. I couldn't believe it. All my hard work, thinking in English, speaking to myself, watching videos, reading books, and listening to English without translating, it was all paying off. I was no longer just learning English, I was living in English. But my journey wasn't over yet. There was still one more step left. I had to use my English in the real world, without fear tomorrow. I would challenge myself to have a full English conversation with a stranger. The day had come. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, thinking in English, naming everything around me, talking to myself, and surrounding myself with English. But there was still one thing I hadn't done yet, a real conversation with a stranger. Every time I thought about it, my heart beat faster. What if I made mistakes? What if I forgot a word? What if they laughed at me? But then, I reminded myself of something important. I had come too far to let fear stop me now. So I made a plan. That evening, I would go to a cafe and talk to someone in English. Not just order food, but actually start a conversation. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that if I didn't do it now, I never would. At 5 p.m., I walked into a cozy little cafe near my house. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Soft music played in the background. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. I stood in line, repeating my order in my head. 1 iced coffee, please. 1 iced coffee, please. When it was my turn, I looked at the cashier and said, 1 iced coffee, please. My voice was steady. My pronunciation was clear. The cashier smiled and asked, "Would you like sugar in it?" For a second, my brain froze. I knew these words. I understood the question. But my nerves made me panic. I forced myself to take a breath and answer in English. "No, thank you. No sugar." She nodded, took my order, and handed me my receipt. I did it! It was a simple conversation, but it was real. I sat down with my coffee and looked around the cafe. There were a few people reading books, some working on laptops, and a girl sitting alone with a notebook. She looked about my age. She was writing something, then crossing words out. It looked like she was studying. Maybe she was learning a language too? I took a deep breath. This was my chance. I walked over to her table and said, "Hi, are you studying?" She looked up, surprised, but then smiled. "Oh, yeah. I'm working on an essay for my English class." My heart raced. She spoke fast, but I understood her. I didn't translate. I just understood. I smiled and said, "That's great. I'm learning English too." She looked even more interested. "Oh, really? Your English is really good." I felt my face get warm. "Me? Good at English?" I laughed nervously. "Thank you. I practice a lot." She nodded. "That's the best way to learn. Just keep practicing." And just like that, we started talking. We talked about school, books, and hobbies. I made mistakes, but I didn't stop. I forgot words, but I found other ways to explain them. And the best part? I was enjoying the conversation. I wasn't thinking about grammar or mistakes. I was just talking. After about 30 minutes, I checked my phone and realized something incredible. I had been speaking English for half an hour. I hadn't planned every word. I hadn't translated in my head. I had just spoken. I looked at my new friend and smiled. "Thank you for talking with me. This was my first real English conversation." She laughed. "You did amazing. You should talk more often." I nodded. She was right. The only thing that had been stopping me all this time was fear. And now I knew the truth. Fear only goes away when you face it. That night, I walked home feeling lighter. For the first time in my life, I felt like English wasn't a school subject. It was a part of me. Didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to keep speaking, keep learning, and keep trying. I knew there would still be challenges. I would still forget words. I would still make mistakes. But now, I understood something important. Mistakes don't stop you from learning. They help you learn. The next day, I woke up with a new goal. I wouldn't just study English, I would live in English. No more waiting, no more fear. This was just the beginning. Angelina's journey is proof that anyone can learn to think in English and speak confidently. You don't need to memorize thousands of words. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to start.